You ever say you'll be back next week and then a bunch of 17th century Spanish soldiers trap you inside the Castillo de San Marcos for, oh, I don't know, about 2 years? Yeah, my bad, guys. But the good news is that I finally tunneled out through about 8 feet of coquina, crawled out, and brushed off some of the dust, and I guess I'm back. I'm slightly dehydrated, but, I'm here. I made it, finally. And, it's been a while, Halloween 2023 to be exact, but after 2 years of ghostly small talk and coquina dust, I figured that it's time that we finish what we started. Welcome back to Greetings from Floweirda. I am your host, Joe Turino, and tonight we're heading back to the ancient city to uncover the phantoms of Old St. Augustine. The streets of St. Augustine look peaceful during the day. The old cobblestone paths shimmer in the sun, lined with pastel storefronts and tourists licking melting ice cream. But when the crowds go home and the lamps flicker on the bayfront, the city exhales. And that's when you start to hear things. The creak of an old door, footsteps where there shouldn't be any, whispers tangled in the fog. Tonight, we're not talking about ancient forts or battles at sea. We're walking into the heart of the town itself. Places where laughter, learning, and healing once echoed. But now something else does. Our first stop is a fortress of pain and punishment. A place where freedom came with a price, and not everyone got out alive. Welcome to the old jail. Just a few blocks north of downtown, tucked behind the old trolley line, the old jail sits in the half-light like a postcard from hell. Built in 1891, it looks more like a pastel Victorian hotel than a place meant for punishment, which was exactly the point. Henry Flagler, the oil tycoon who turned St. Augustine into a Gilded Age resort town, didn't want his wealthy guests catching sight or sound of criminals being hauled through the streets. So he financed a new jail on the city's edge, far enough from the Ponce de Leon Hotel that no one sipping champagne would hear the screams. Because in Florida, even civic planning comes with a twist of irony. The structure was built by the P.J. Pauley Jail Company of St. Louis, the same folks who built Alcatraz, and Flagler spared no expense. 2 stories of rust-colored iron bars, a gallows yard hidden from public view, and a separate women's ward where heat and humidity did most of the punishing. Inside, it was chaos wrapped in discipline. Up to 72 prisoners crammed into 6 tiny cells, sleeping 3 high in metal bunks. There was no plumbing, just buckets. And only a single meal a day, usually grits or beans, were thick enough to patch a wall. Guards called it correction, but the inmates called it suffering. Flagler built his fortune on oil, but here in Florida, he built his empire on labor. Cheap, endless labor. Many of the men who filled these cells weren't just punished here. They were worked to death under the Florida sun. Prisoners from the old jail were leased out to help build the very empire that surrounded them. Flagler's hotels, his rail lines, his dream of a paradise by the sea. The state called it rehabilitation through work. But make no mistake, it was slavery by another name. The system was called convict leasing, and it gave men like Flagler an endless supply of hands for the dirtiest, deadliest jobs. When one prisoner died, another took his place. And those who survived came back here broken, burned, and forgotten. Maybe that's why the air in this place feels thick. It's carrying the weight of every life spent building someone else's dream. Sometimes, history really is scarier than the ghosts. And the man who ruled it all was every bit as unforgiving as the walls themselves. Sheriff Joe Perry, St. John County's first sheriff, was a strict, old-school lawman who believed discipline and fear were the only tools that worked. He ruled the jail for more than 50 years, enforcing order with an iron fist and a cold stare. Perry lived with his family on the second floor, right next to the cell block that housed his prisoners. His wife cooked meals, his children played in the yard, and just a few feet away, men screamed. Neighbors said he was strict but fair. The inmates, however, told a different story. He carried a whip, used isolation as punishment, and made damn sure that no one forgot who was in charge. Executions were carried out in the courtyard, often with Perry himself overseeing them. The gallows stood in the sun, close enough that everyone inside could hear the thud when the trapdoor fell. It said that he believed fear was the only language that criminals understood, and for some reason, that fear followed them into the grave. The jail didn't just hold hardened killers. Its cells were packed with vagrants, drunks, and anyone who'd wandered too far off the straight and narrow. Women were locked away for petty crimes, public drunkenness, vagrancy, even gossiping too loudly in church. The old jail didn't care whether you were guilty or desperate. Inside, survival was its own verdict. And in one of history's cruel little jokes, the man who built this place, Henry Flagler himself, was once arrested for public intoxication and briefly thrown into the same jail that he funded. I guess karma doesn't care how much oil money you've got, does it, Henry? Over the decades, stories of its inmates became part of the local folklore. There was Sim Jackson, who was charged with murdering his wife with a straight razor. Some say Al Capone himself was once transferred through these very cells, though there's no record that proves it. And still the rumors persist and the walls don't seem eager to correct anybody. Even decades later, people swear they can still hear the sheriff's boots on the cell block, his heavy keys jingling at his side. Maybe he's still keeping order. Or maybe he's finally realizing that the ghosts he created won't let him rest either. Locals still talk about the spirit of Charlie Powell, a man hanged in 1908 for murdering his wife. He swore his innocence until the trapdoor fell. And since then, visitors say that a shadow still sways in the rafters when lightning flashes, as if Charlie's ghost never got the message that his sentence was carried out. Tour guides tell stories of heavy footsteps pacing empty cell blocks, of doors that slam on their own, of the smell of pipe smoke curling through corridors long since scrubbed clean. Some investigators claim that their EMF meters spike every time they pass the gallows yard. Others have captured what sounds like a man gasping or maybe laughing right before the recording shuts off. One night, a tour guide locking up heard a voice behind her say, "Don't leave me." When she turned around, the hallway was empty, and she quit the very next day. And I can't blame her. Personally, I've been inside that place after dark, and the air gets pretty heavy, thick enough to feel like you're breathing someone else's memories. Still, the old jail draws crowds. Every night, people line up for ghost tours, paying good money to walk through what was once somebody else's worst nightmares. Well, that's Florida for you. We turn our traumas into tourism. And maybe that's why the spirits here don't rest. For them, the sentence never really ended. Next, we leave the gallows behind and head a few blocks east to a place that once rang with the laughter of children, a sound that some say still echoes after dark. After the heaviness of the jail, the air downtown feels almost forgiving. The rain stopped, the cobblestones shine, and the street lamps throw that amber glow that makes the ancient city look like a storybook. Tucked in those shadows sits a small cedar and cypress house that stood there for nearly 3 centuries. The Oldest Wooden Schoolhouse. Its story reaches deeper than the legend. This little schoolhouse is part of the soul of St. Augustine, especially in the Minorcan quarter. In 1768, hundreds of Minorcans came to Florida as indentured servants, dreaming of freedom and land, and instead found hardship and betrayal in New Smyrna. Those who survived walked north to St. Augustine, tattered, starving, but unbroken. Here, they built homes, family, and hope. One of them was Juan Ginopoli, a Greek carpenter. He turned his house into a classroom for Minorcan children, teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, and maybe a little resilience. Tuition was 12.5 cents a week for the little ones, and 25 cents for the older kids, which was enough to cover quills, parchment, and ink. There was no AC, no internet, just a room full of sweaty kids, a stern teacher, and the occasional lizard falling from the ceiling. A real Florida education. Lessons ended in 1864, the Civil War scattering families and priorities. For decades, the building sat silent until 1931, when 9 former students, grown now, gray now, returned. They reassembled the room exactly as they'd left it. The same desks, the same books, the same chalkboard. That's not nostalgia. That's resistance, refusal to let the past be forgotten. During the day, it's charming. A mannequin teacher, tiny desks, the ghosts of childhood discipline. But after dark, the schoolhouse changes. The upstairs quarters where the teacher and his family once slept are closed off now. The stairs are too fragile to climb. Besides them hangs a mirror angled so visitors can see the landing above. And sometimes, they say, something moves in that reflection. A flicker, a figure, the hint of someone still watching the lesson unfold. Beneath those same stairs is a child-sized alcove locals call the dungeon. Supposedly where troublesome students were sent to think about their sins. Some say they still hear quiet sobbing from that dark corner when night tours end. And then there's the woman in white, a motionless figure seen in the second-story window looking over St. George Street. Some believe she's the teacher's wife, ever vigilant over her students, while others think she's a mother waiting for her child who never came home. She's been spotted peering up staircases and glimpsed in mirrors, a pale outline that fades when you blink. And once in a while, as the city goes quiet, a child's giggle floats down the street, bright and brief, like a memory trying to speak. Investigators set up motion sensors that blinked one by one, as if a line of invisible students were filing out for recess. And there's that music box on the shelf, locked away every night, that still plays on its own, slow, uneven, always stopping just before midnight. Maybe it's just the humidity warping the gears, or maybe those kids are still waiting for class to start. Whatever the truth, the Oldest Wooden Schoolhouse reminds us that innocence can haunt too. Not with anger, but with echoes. The kind that makes you smile before you shiver. From lessons in life to lessons in death, our next stop takes us to a place where healing and haunting share the same corridor. Welcome to the Spanish Military Hospital. A few quiet turns from St. George Street brings you to Avila's, the oldest street in America and one of the eeriest after dark. Here sits the Spanish Military Hospital Museum, a low, coral-colored building with dark shutters and a steep roofline. It's simple, quiet, yet it feels alive. The kind of place that remembers everything that ever happened inside. The original hospital dates back to the 1700s during the Spanish colonial era. Back then, it was called Hospital de Nuestra Señora de la Soledad, the Hospital of Our Lady of Solitude, a fitting name considering how many who entered would never walk out. The complex was never just one building. It was a three-part facility. Hospital West, built during the First Spanish period, Hospital East, constructed during the British occupation, and the apothecary in the William Watson House. Watson was a Scottish carpenter who bought and remodeled the structure between 1763 and 1783 when Britain controlled St. Augustine. When the Spanish reclaimed Floweirda in 1783, those buildings, along with their outbuildings and gardens, became a unified medical complex. Avila Street, which cuts between the two wings, was once called Hospital Street, and it stayed that way until 1924. The hospital was strictly military. Only soldiers were treated here. Only military staff worked in its wards. Discipline and duty were the rule, even in death. In 1818, Hospital West burned to the ground. The remaining sections operated until 1823, 2 years into the American territorial period. Hospital East was destroyed in a fire in 1895, leaving only the Watson House standing. What you see today is a reconstruction, but beneath those stones are the original foundations, and beneath those foundations lie the bones of the past. Inside, surgery meant no anesthesia, only whiskey, faith, or sheer willpower. Bloodletting was prescribed for everything from infection to heartbreak. The air hung heavy with sweat, iron, and herbs from the apothecary garden next door, where doctors mixed remedies from rosemary, aloe, and wild tobacco. Visitors today can still walk that same layout: the operating room, patient wards, administration office, and the morgue beside the morning room. Back then, a bell would ring each time a patient passed, summoning mourners to pray. That solemn sound, a toll for every soul, inspired the phrase that we still use today: for whom the bell tolls. Standing there, you can almost hear that bell rolling down Avila Street, carried on the same wind that still stirs the Spanish moss. A call not just for the dead, but for the living who remember them. By the early 1800s, yellow fever and typhoid swept through the city, turning the hospital into something between a chapel and a morgue. And when the city tore it down in 1821 to install new water lines, they found something else entirely. Workers reported strange things as they broke ground. A sense that the place was frightening, evil. One said a mist hung in the air that felt alive. Then a shovel hit something solid. Beneath the foundations lay thousands of human bones. At first, they were believed to belong to the Timucuan people, the native tribes who lived here before the Spanish came. But decades later, discoveries near the Fountain of Youth proved that the Timucuan burial grounds were elsewhere. That meant the remains beneath the hospital were older, from another tribe long erased by the Timucuans themselves. Their spirits had been buried under centuries of suffering, under the soldiers, under the patients, under the very floors where life and death once traded places. So when those foundations were torn open, maybe it wasn't just the ghosts of soldiers that stirred. Maybe it was something far older, something that had been waiting. From that day on, the reports started. Cold drafts that moved against the breeze, shadows that crossed walls when no one stood there. One worker claimed the building didn't want to be rebuilt. The morning ward is still the most active room in the hospital. Guides say they've heard cries, moaning, and muffled conversations in empty air. Once, a phantom indentation appeared on a bed, as if someone had just lain down to die. The most terrifying sighting is a figure in a white hospital gown, blood dripping from the stump of a missing arm. Witnesses say it wanders the ward in silence, head bowed as though still waiting for a doctor who never came. Some guests have felt their chest tighten, a weight, a hand pressing down as if an unseen surgeon leans in to check for a pulse. Old letters from the hospital mention staff who refused to enter certain rooms, claiming the air was thick with evil presence, like a mist that never dissipates. The Watson house, the apothecary portion, is said to hold the worst of it. Visitors describe it as venomous, a place where the shadows feel alive. One guide swore the smell of sulfur and smoke rose from the floorboards just before a door slammed itself shut. Whether these are residual echoes or something sentient, the hospital feels less like a museum and more like a recording that won't stop playing. Every cry, every heartbeat, every death call looping through time. And yet, in the quiet corners, you can feel compassion too. A warm hand on your shoulder, a whisper of reassurance. Maybe the doctors never stopped their rounds. Maybe the souls here aren't trapped, just unwilling to stop caring. Next, we leave the echo of the corridor for the silence of the graves. Our final stop, Tolomato Cemetery, a resting place where the dead still have stories to tell. Just north of the plaza, beyond the hum of bars and the glow of bayfront lights, sits a patch of ground where St. Augustine holds its breath. A wrought iron gate, a coquina wall, and behind it, a sea of leaning headstones bowed under the weight of Spanish moss. Tolomato Cemetery. This quiet acre carries centuries of stories. Long before it was a Catholic burial ground, the land was home to the mission of Tolomato, a village for Christian Guale Indians founded by Franciscan friars in the early 1700s. When the British burned the mission, the Spanish reclaimed the land and declared it sacred. From that moment, this soil became a mirror of St. Augustine itself, layered, diverse, unrelenting. Spaniards, Menorcans, Cubans, Africans, and Irish all found rest here. 1,000 lives in less than an acre. A city's worth of faith pressed into the dirt. The first burials began around 1740, and the cemetery stayed active for nearly a century and a half. Its coquina walls and iron gates went up in the late 1700s, part protection, part declaration that even the dead deserved boundaries. Inside once stood a small chapel where the last rites were read in Latin and in Spanish. It was torn down long ago, but the foundation still sleeps beneath the grass. In 1884, the city closed Tolomato to new burials. Yellow fever, overcrowding, and progress had taken their toll. A few final interments, mostly children and priests, came a few years later. After that, the gates were sealed, but not everything inside went quiet. More than 1,000 souls rest here, though fewer than 100 stones remain. Storms toppled markers, thieves took relics, and the Floweirda sun erased names faster than families could carve them back. The angels that still stand here have missing hands, and their eyes, pitted, sightless, seem to watch you wherever you walk. Among the names still known is Father Felix Varela, the Cuban priest once branded a traitor for teaching liberty, now on the path to sainthood. Nearby lies Bishop Augustine Verot, Florida's first bishop, and General James Smith of the Confederacy. Even in death, Tolomato is a conversation between opposites, saints and sinners, colonists and converts, faith and doubt. But not everyone here rests quietly. "15-year-old Elizabeth Forrester, the daughter of a British officer, died in 1798. Her family buried her in her best dress, wrapped in lace, but grave robbers soon broke into her vault, stripping her body for jewelry and clothing. desecration, theft, violation. Ever since, visitors have heard soft crying near her tomb and smelled lilacs drifting through the air, though no flowers bloom here anymore. Then there's Bishop Farad, a holy man with, let's say, a memorable farewell. It was mid-June, sweltering, and to keep the bishop cool for his grand funeral, workers sealed his iron casket with sawdust and ice, hermetically and completely. As mourners gathered, the trapped heat and gases began to build. The coffin burst, the glass lid shattered, and the good bishop's remains baptized everyone in the front row. They rushed him to the chapel across the street and reburied him beside Father Varela, Florida's would-be saint. But some say he never stopped pacing the grounds. 2 men in vestments have been seen wandering among the stones, one tall, one short, moving in silence before fading into the fog. Varad and Varela, partners in eternal penance. Or maybe just arguing over whose idea that iron coffin really was. And then there's little James P. Morgan, 5 years old, who loved to climb the big oak just inside the gates. One afternoon in 1877, he slipped and fell. His neck broke on the consecrated soil below. His mother begged the priest to let her bury him right there at the base of the tree. For years, she swore she could still see him sitting in its Y-shaped branches, the same white shirt, the same linen overalls, smiling before fading into the leaves. At first, people blamed grief, but then others began to see him too. A pale boy in the moonlight, watching quietly, waiting for his mother to call him home. Maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's love that never left. In Tolomato, the line between the sacred and the strange has always been thin. Tolomato isn't the end of St. Augustine's stories. It's where the noise fades and the whispers begin. Where the living stop talking and the city starts speaking back. Next time on Greetings from Floweirda, we'll follow those whispers out of Tolomato and down to the bay, where the tragedies and hauntings stretch beyond the city walls. From the lighthouse to the old hotels, we'll uncover the stories still echoing through the ancient city's salt air. It's the final chapter in our St. Augustine trilogy, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Greetings from Floweirda is written, researched, and narrated by me, Joe Turino. Sound design and production by yours truly, with original theme music by Modern Mimes. You can find more stories, photos, and episode extras at @FloweirdaPod on Instagram. And if you like what you hear, share the show, leave a review, or tell a friend who loves a little weird with their history. And as always, stay weird, Florida. See you next time.